My name's Emily Baker. I am now the Interim Curator here at the Art Gallery of St. Albert, and I'll be introducing you to the fantastic Kyle Beal. He's the artist who's behind our current exhibition, Spectator Sports, and he is here to answer all of your questions, and we'll have a really interesting conversation about his work and all of the pieces that are currently on display, which ironically you can't see. But Kyle's background is he has a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Victoria in British Columbia and a BFA from the Alberta College of Art and Design. He's had exhibitions across Canada and the United States, including Montreal, Toronto, New York City, Calgary, Saskatoon, Seattle, and Vancouver. And so his work was also featured in the 2015 Alberta Biennial, which was shown at the Art Gallery of Alberta, as well as at the Esker Foundation for the Arts in Calgary. And so I will be sharing my screen so that you can see the exhibition too. And Kyle, how about you give us a quick introduction to the show?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name's Kyle Beal. And yeah, this is Spectator Sports, which I've kind of been working on developing and finally realizing since about 2018, I think. And it kind of carries on some thoughts of mine in my practice about the idea of just the individual and performance in the everyday, and yeah, how we kind of present ourselves to a public and the things we sort of reveal and conceal that maybe create our identity either online or in real life, because obviously we're not all online, and the idea of living online is actually quite new. So it's sort of an extension of some things that have just been kind of happening for quite a long time.
So Kyle, where did you really start your thinking for this exhibition? Like, when did you kind of start planning all of the pieces and putting it together?
So I think it kind of comes, this show for me kind of, I guess, brings to a head a couple different ideas and bodies of work and just thoughts that I've sort of been developing for the last 10 plus years, related to, this idea of performance, or sort of invisible performance, because you're not always typically conscious of it. And this idea of the mirror as, I guess, a kind of a screen that we, see ourselves in. And so I guess, it kind of stems from my own thinking of a few different exhibitions and stuff of mine, from a show I did in 2010 called Surveying the Danger Field, which was a little bit about stand-up comedy and this idea of maybe the performing in the gallery. And then actually a show I did at Vivian Art down in Calgary in 2018, which was a series of drawings of mirrors that either didn't reflect because they were just the mirror drawings, or were typically absent of the figure. And so in that way, this show is kind of a extension and flip of that, where it's sort of all about the viewer, and the body's very present because you're able to see yourself as you kind of participate and walk around the exhibition. So that's sort of, I think for me, where it's all coming from.
Yeah, and there's lots of different materials and kind of approaches that you're taking in this exhibition. So I was wondering if you wanted to expand a little bit on just like the sheer variety of mediums that you're using in this show.
Sure. So I think, it's, so when I was at ACAD, I majored in drawing, and in that particular program, it was a little bit open to interpretation as to what drawing was. So from sort of my original training, I've always been encouraged and indulged, I suppose, to investigate and explore a variety of media and techniques and formats. So in that way, I feel it just very natural to think about, I guess, ideas and then how sort of to express those ideas. So, with the In a Flash series, those are small graphite and charcoal on paper, pretty classical drawings. And then like a work like Business Class is obviously found objects that are combined and configured to hopefully create some meaning. And for me, I just like, I like the difference. I like the freedom of that. And I think that's one of kind of the wonderful things about an art practice is its potential to kind of get you outside of your own box, I guess. Or at least that's what I like about it, is I don't feel like that limitation exists in a way that, it doesn't have those constraints. So the other thing too is not all ideas need to be expressed the same way, I guess. So, for my way of thinking, you know, well, Mirror Stage could be a drawing. It's much better as an object, and more true and complete realization of that concept than just kind of trying to put everything into the drawing box. So I kind of just like that difference. And then the other truth of it is for my drawings, I'm very uptight about them. So, they're all kind of meticulous and time consuming, and they take a level of focus, and there's a level of just, control that, well, is great for drawings. I like to sort of resist a little bit. So, like the series of mirrors, even though they're described as meticulous and very painstakingly applying the leaf and things like that, for me, they're very liberating because in that format, I can experiment with smoke or oxidization or color in a way or pattern in a way that in the drawings I'm not as maybe comfortable with because they're about a different sort of control and things like that. So for all those reasons, that's where I kind of get, I like the difference in the multimedia thing to sort of, take one idea and approach it from maybe different points of view and materials to kind of probe and explore it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really interesting. A lot of our viewers, both who were here in person in December before we closed and people who've been seeing the exhibit online, are really interested and have lots of different avenues to enter into your ideas and the thoughts that you're kind of playing with in your different works by having so many different materials to sort of pique their interest and sort of grip their curiosity. I think a good place to start might be with some of those meticulous drawings. So if we want to sort of dive in a little bit to the In a Flash series,
Sure.
viewers can see all of them on the screen right now, and then we'll have close-ups of all of the drawings a little bit further on. But Kyle, do you kind of want to describe what people are looking at here?
Sure. So, this series, it's kind of an ongoing series for me. I actually started it in 2018 when I was preparing works for those mirror drawing to be exhibited at Vivian Art that I've kind of previously mentioned. And I kind of wasn't quite resolved with them yet, and so they kind of had to percolate for a little bit longer. But basically, what I'm doing is I'm finding images online of people who have taken a mirror selfie with a flash. So, it's kind of a funny subgenre of the selfie. Um, so, in a way, for me, I kind of like them because there's a sense of maybe a technical incompetence happening, but also maybe a sense of very deliberate revealing and concealing at the same time. And so they're all rendered, as mentioned, in charcoal and graphite. And in this instance, I've just drawn them basically the same size as a screen. So they're, I think, 3.5 inches wide, or 3 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall, or wide as the one case may be. So they're very intimate. They're very that digital size that we're all accustomed to looking at nowadays. And yeah, I just kind of like the idea of revealing and concealing. And actually, what you sort of get is a variety of expressive hand gestures that I sort of think are a nice little, through line with them. Of, you're not getting the face, but you're getting these little hand of, people are, holding their phones in a variety of ways. So, yeah, that's kind of how I like them. I mean, there's a sense of, kind of funniness to these anonymous things. And again, they're kind of found images. So that's kind of how, yeah, that's, I guess, about it. I mean, they, I think, relate to the exhibition and are sort of deliberately placed opposite wall of the mirrors because, yeah, it is like it's a mirror selfie with a flash. So you needed to have the mirror there originally. So I think there's at least a sense of you are performing for yourself and then possibly, for somebody else that you might email or upload this photo to. But, initially you had to look at yourself to get this thing. um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Well, they're because they're so small, people have to get quite close to be able to see what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And so like on the computer screens right now, they might actually be a little bit larger in people's homes than they would
Maybe.
be in person. It depends on what kind of screen you're using. But I think it's really interesting, the idea that you're playing with, that they're sort of interacting with themselves when they're initially taking this picture. But I don't think that the photos are intended for the person, like for that person to be the only audience.
No, they were, yeah, you got to upload it, like that's a choice. And whether you put it on Instagram or Tumblr or wherever, it's sort of there for public consumption. And the level of sort of anonymity with the flash is, I think, interesting. So they're uncredited I use them as fodder for a series of drawings, right? And so I'll find ones that I think are interesting and then manipulate them a little bit in the drawing and in the preparation for the drawing so that they're mine. Um, I should add too, like for me, they're actually really fun drawings to make because um, you get to have these little bits of expressiveness or kind of tiny, smaller gestures and things of that nature. A funny part, the thing I love about drawing, one of my favorite things about drawing is actually the act of erasure when you're in drawing to make them. So in that sense, there's a nice kind of like parallel to the flash as a erasure of identity, I think.
And so there's one drawing in the series that has this fantastic cracked frame on it. Do you want to explain your thinking around that a little bit?
um, sure. Well, so as you can kind of see, like in the framing and in the matting, I then designed like just a little rounded corner mat that just further emphasized and highlighted the kind of cell phone device nature of these things, just in case it wasn't clear enough. And I thought, when I was framing them all up, it would be, we all know somebody that's got that cracked. Maybe not if you're an adult, but typically if you're my age or younger, you have one friend that's got that cracked screen phone that they just can't give up for a while for a variety of reasons. So I thought it would be good to have that kind of reference. That's just kind of a playful bit of framing. That yeah, kind of just again re-emphasize the whole deviceness and stuff, but just me having fun too as a picture framer of my own artwork.
Yeah. And I think the idea of humor is something that might not get explored quite as often in the art world as we might like to think. And so I'm going to move on to another piece, Mirror Stage, which I think has a lot of sort of wit and humor built right into the work.
Yeah.
And so we've got a few images of it here, but do you want to describe what the work is?
Sure. So yeah, it's basically, I mean, a riff on a soapbox or like milk crate kind of thing, um, as a upturned, so it becomes a platform for maybe public speaking, and that's maybe, I don't know how historically like often you would see that, but it's certainly an embedded idea in, I think, our society of the public speaker type thing. And so actually for me, I'd had this kind of notion of wanting to work with the soapbox, that kind of imagery of for probably 10 years, and it kind of just percolated. And again, as I was kind of working on this show, I had this idea of doing a mirrored version, and it wasn't fully resolved. And then you kind of like, well, okay, I'd mirror it, but then what? Like, how is this piece going to sort of, get some sort of resonance beyond just looking like a cool mirrored thing? And so I was visiting a friend in Montreal, I think 2019 or yeah, and they had this milk, they're like pop box or whatever, just for their records, and it had bottoms up on it, like I assume it was a soda company or something. And just sitting in their living room noticing this thing, it was kind of like the perfect resolution punchline, adding this like level of depth and resonance for me that I really liked. And so I kind of came back to Edmonton, and it's like, okay, bottoms up, that's that's the perfect punchline to this milk crate upturned that acts as a stage. So yeah, like I think it's sort of suggestive. I mean, you know, uh, you'd go maybe like ass over tea kettle, I guess, pardon my language, as part of the joke of, there's a certain confidence or hubris, I think, in standing up to say something or like taking a public platform. And then, of course, if you look down at your own feet, you'll sort of be bottoms up as well. So yeah, I don't know what more to say about it than that, but yeah, I just like this idea of the public platform like that, and a soapbox is in some ways, I was saying to somebody else, it's like the lowest. That's all you've got to do to stand out and stand up and kind of have a public platform. And I mean, in today's world, in a more digital sense, all you've got to do is sort of sign up and log on. And we're encouraged to do those sorts of things, even though we may not think about them as in the same way. We certainly wouldn't go onto a street corner and start doing whatever we might do to draw attention to ourselves, but we do it online, whether it's political or whatever discourse you might want to have. So yeah, that's kind of the interest in that project, I think. And to your point, Emily, like humor is, for me, even though I don't always think of the work I'm making as funny. I mean, the humor is a constant preoccupation, and um, I think it's a useful strategy in the same way that it, if you kind of have a bit of a punchline or a chuckle, it's a very accessible, um, that kind of can put you at ease, and then it's a avenue to think about things. But I was reading your notes earlier, and you had an interesting thing about it that I hadn't actually considered, which was that it almost becomes invisible when you enter the space because of its reflective
Yeah,
um,
you can kind of get
qualities.
a sense of that in the photograph. Like you can see the concrete floor reflected on all sides.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, when people come in, they don't necessarily notice it right away. And the reflectiveness, when they do start interacting with it, sort of forces them to spend longer with the piece because it becomes really hard to read the text when you do finally start interacting with the work and try to see the piece, but your reflection becomes this active part in the work. And so it's almost like you're trying to look around yourself
yeah, exactly.
in order to interact with this work. And so I had been wondering if that was intentional, but I guess it's sort of one of those happy instances where a really well thought out piece sort of starts taking on this even larger life of its own when it's given an audience.
Well, I think with the mirroring, like what's key and what I like about that is you do have to, as a viewer, you do have to at least catch a glimpse of yourself, and in turn, I guess, implicate yourself in the act of viewing a little bit. But yeah, that's by design, and I've been kind of curious with that for 10 plus years, but I thought there's something quite interesting and salient about the idea of it almost disappearing, um, just given that it's kind of a platform that you picked up on that I actually hadn't picked up on. So
And so yeah, like speaking of like reflective and mirrored pieces and trying to see around yourself, we can move on to the actual like the mirrored pieces here,
sure.
our actual mirrors. For viewers at home, um, you are missing out a little bit when you're looking at these. We've had some very clever people come in and photograph them so that you can't actually see a reflection. And so they are missing kind of that active element. So you can get a little bit of a clearer view of some of the text, but also you're missing a large part of interacting with the works just as a visual note for the rest of the slideshow. But Kyle, do you want to kind of expand on what we're looking at here?
Sure. So these are a series of, I mean, they're mostly mirror glass. They're 24 inches wide, 30 inches high, just cut beveled pieces of glass that um, either I've mirrored onto the back with metal leaf using a method that's called veriglamise, which is a kind of traditional method of applying leafed metal onto glass. So in the olden days, they would have made mirrors that way. Or there's a couple that I've they were mirrors that you can work into the it's not silver anymore, it's aluminum, but you can work into the thin layer of aluminum behind the glass that way. And then there's a couple others that are either highly reflective mylar or that kind of 3M reflective fabric um, that just kind of reflects all lights in all directions. And yeah, excuse me. So yeah, it's just again, it's an ongoing series for me that sort of came about and developed out of this series of drawings of non-reflective mirrors. And of course, what's the next thing you would think about was then maybe more active reflection and making them. And so, or at least that's how I felt. So yeah, so I started making them, and I'd kind of been introduced to the practice of Barry Glamise through Jarvis Hall, Fine Frames in Calgary, where I used to work as a picture framer, and he would apply leaf to glass for like high-end interiors. And so I kind of I knew of this practice, and then kind of just developed learning about it a little bit more on my own. But yeah, like so in this one, there's two kinds of metal leaf, and then you just paint the back to give it that opacity, and you can kind of see there's some orange paint behind that, where maybe it'd traditionally be black or something like that. But that just, you can play around with that. Anyway, so then with this series, I kind of got in my mind to do them all the same size, that 24 by 30 inches. And then I thought it would be interesting to, again, to Emily's point, knowing that the viewer will have to be looking at themselves, it would be also useful to embed text within the surfaces. Just because I like text in my practice, it kind of offers a different avenue to express things and think about things than maybe more image-based drawings. So with those kind of two things in mind, I started developing some texts to embed, and this one says reflective self. Oh, I can't even read it.
This one's one of the hardest ones.
Yeah,
this one one of the hardest.
And they're deliberately, some of them are more deliberately difficult than others, and that is to sort of extend the reading of it, as opposed to just having a very quick read of 3 words or something. If you have to work at it, it just kind of slows things down, is my opinion or my hope. So it's just ourself. This one's just alliterative versions of self, reflective, reductive, refracted, I think is one in there. And with all the text, I'm just constantly making little notes, and I think in my practice, it's not a research-based practice, but I'd call it, maybe there's some informal research going on. So I'll, find books that, deal with subjects that I'm interested in relation to how I'm thinking about or what I'm thinking about. So, a few books on the history of mirrors, and a few books on the history of self and individualism, kind of coming up from, maybe ancient Greece and times till now. And then I'll just make little notes and little phrases and play around with different things. And really what I'm always looking for is just something that resonates with me. So, you end up with more discards than good ones, by design, I suppose. And, again, with language, for me, there's a real sense of play. And so, you can have fun with, just, this one says minor mirror miseries. And it just kind of is fun to say and think about. And it's maybe a little bit more of a silly one, but alliteration is fun. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm going with these. I just, and as I kind of mentioned earlier, so you're, really, they're actually very controlled, but relative to the drawings, there's a certain amount of freedom in there, because you're going for certain surface effects, or in this instance of the Spectator Sports one, you can get, it's a very variegated or something. So leaf is what it's called. So it already has the blue, blotchy, kind of psychedelic color built into the leaf. which for me is very lovely to look at, but it's not a thing I would be able to let go of the control for to do on my own. So, there's kind of those aspects for me are make them fun to make. And I guess I'll just speak a little bit more on how the leaf is attached, because maybe people are interested just in the practical aspect of it. But basically, it's a once you clean the back of the glass, you can just wet it with a very thin, like gelatin size. So I actually just use gelatin and water, and you wet it, and then you can just lay the leaf on very gently because it's obviously super, super thin metal. And as the water evaporates, it basically vacuum sucks the metal onto the back of the glass, and the gelatin acts as a glue. And you really don't, it's not like jello, it's very, very small amount of gelatin. And so, it basically sucks the leaf onto the glass, and then you just kind of give it a slight buff with like a microfiber cloth or cotton balls or something, and it polishes out to a very fine mirrored surface. And that then you just kind of put a protective paint over the back of that, and you've got yourself a mirror. So it's a pretty interesting process. And part of that, again, for me, the pleasure of it is learning about that and learning a little bit about the history of mirrors as a longer sort of industrial project. And there's a lot of chicanery and industrial sort of espionage and hijinks going on back in the old days, trying to steal the knowledge from the Italians and such. And it's a wild history, actually, and it sort of splits two ways, and we end up with high-powered telescopes and cameras and stuff like that. So it's anyway. Moving on, I guess.
It's a nice thought, because one of the interesting things that you included in some of your artist statements was this link to historic mirrors, specifically to Louis XIV's Palace of Versailles, and the incredible impact that he made with mirrors, which at the time was brand new technology, and how he kind of used them as a way of performing sort of luxury and opulence, and sort of really using them in a kind of a similar, like, of creating his own brand, which I think is still very topical today.
Yeah, good. Thanks for drawing me back. You're right. So part of that history or like research was discovering, like Louis XIV a little bit more intimately. And I think we're all sort of familiar with the Hall of Mirrors at Place Versailles or Versailles Palace or whatever. But then realizing that actually sort of prior to that, we weren't really used to seeing our own reflection constantly, and like mirrors were rare and precious, and now they're actually cheap and ubiquitous. But I kind of became, for me, fascinated by the history, and how thinking about how the court of Versailles, suddenly confronted with their own reflection constantly, it changed how things operated.
And so let's move on to Vanity Mirror Stage Fright A and C. A is the one that's on the left, and C would be on the right with the word play in it. And so, Kyle, can you expand a little bit on what we're looking at? Because sometimes it might be a little disorienting if you're not quite sure what you're seeing.
Sure. So, they're charcoal drawings. They're 30 inches high by 44 inches wide. And they're based on found images, again, researched online, of collapsed stages. So, that's the kind of, I guess, brief outline. And I mean, in this instance, I I can remember where I was when I thought this was an interesting idea to kind of explore. I was at a concert in Vancouver back when we could do both those things. And I just kind of, again, in the context of thinking about performance and kind of, generating ideas for my practice, I guess. I was standing at this concert wondering what, that could like kind of look at. And it picks up, I think, on a thread from a work I had done, maybe in 27 or 2008, called the Burnt Out Comedy Club, and which was a sort of destroyed comedy club photograph thing that I had made, and so anyway, so here I am, nearly 15 years later, kind of, well, a dozen years later, picking up on this sort of thread of an idea within my practice, and yeah, so as I often do, you kind of have an inkling of an idea, and then I kind of start to work it in drawings, and doing some image research online to find images that you can use as source material. So they're not composite images. For me, I'll just take a corner or something that I think is compelling and also can be realized in a drawing. I mean, not every image makes sense as a drawing, so you kind of have to figure it out a little bit. Yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, how I came to those. And then for me, in these drawings, I really wanted like a very fronty, I guess, kind of like just total destruction sort of thing. So yeah, they're very dense at the bottom, or like I kind of think of the one that has play in it, Vanity Mirror Stage Fright C, almost as like a cubist space, and it's just like really kind of flat and frontal. And yeah, so they're kind of, graphic, and they have this, again, sort of challenge in drawing for me of being really tightly controlled and then finding these little places to have looseness and play and gesture and pleasure, which, I mean, seems weird in the context of black and white drawing of that thing that's been destroyed. But when you're making them, those are the kind of like little day-to-day challenges that kind of keep me interested in drawing. So they don't necessarily look like any, they end up being pretty tight and pretty controlled, but they're not supposed to look photographic. They're supposed to look kind of plausibly real, but yeah, I guess they have photographic qualities, but they're drawings. They're deliberately drawings. And yeah, so I guess for me, this idea of the collapse stage kind of resonated just because of, I think you see a sort of splintering of things. I was, how maybe like big spectacle and big entertainment is just, it kind of splinters off, and now we're all into our own little niches and things like that. And there's not really, I guess there's a tension there of like, yeah, I don't know. There's just a tension that I like in these drawings. I don't know if they fit perfectly. Like, I don't have a fully resolved sort of like statement about them, but yeah, I mean, the idea of like one unifying spectacle or like things is kind of interesting to me, that it just is very hard at this point because there's so many options and platforms and ways to express yourself that it's actually really hard to get an audience in one way. And yet on the other hand, the tools are all there. Yeah, I don't know.
I like the ideas about celebrity that they kind of bring up in a lot of the viewer. Like if you think
Yeah.
about how big this stage would have had to have been to create this much rubble,
Yeah.
it would have been some sort of probably a really large scale concert, probably something that's a pretty big name band. But when you start to look at these pieces really closely, you realize there's no space for an audience in this
Yeah.
place. Like there's no seating, there's no standing area, there's almost no room right in the front of the piece where you would imagine an audience to be.
Yeah.
Um, and so it kind of raises the question of like who was the audience? Does it even need to be there anymore? Like
Yeah.
is this collapse the big draw now?
Well, and certainly I think part of it is, I mean, there's a fascination and like a desire to see big things fail. We take a certain amount of pleasure in it. I was thinking, I mean, U2 was once the biggest band in the world, and it's sort of a tangent, but I was thinking about their like massive misstep when they uploaded like their album to everybody's iPhones or iPods or whatever. And I mean, as I say, it's a bit of a tangent, but I found that idea of like trying to continue to be at this scale and like have this audience kind of, it's like weirdly awkward and painful. And yet, you know, so we kind of take a certain amount of pleasure in watching like them fall or whatever, um, or that kind of failure. But yeah, it's, you know, again, you've got the insights here, Emily, because I mean, there really isn't a place for the audience in it. I mean, they're very close to it. You'd be front row, I guess.
Right.
Um,
First
but
pass view to the collapse of whatever
yeah,
it is that we're thinking about, whether it's celebrity or performance or even fame, um, in and of itself. And so
yeah,
if you
maybe
want to,
yeah, maybe you're just like too close to it. That's maybe, you know, the thing. I'm not sure. Like for me, I was, yeah, as I say, I don't know if they're perfectly resolved, but I found them like interesting. And that's kind of part of the thing of my practice is that I think for me, there's a tension sometimes between, um, you know, running on instinct and then running on like a previously intellectualized premise. Um, and so sometimes you get, you know, you work more intuitively, and then other times, for me at least, I'll have a fully realized vision that really then you're just performing A, B, and C to get the result of. So yeah, I think in the instance of these drawings, they're probably more intuitive um, way of working and a little bit less intellectualized, which makes them harder to talk about, but maybe more fun to look at.
well, it's a nice balance to be able to
Yeah.
have both. So, and it's maybe if you wanted to sort of move on to the last piece that's in the exhibition. And as you can see, it's made up of lots of different open signs. And ironically, it's the only piece you can see during the closure because you can see it from the street. It's on until 1 o'clock every morning. Kyle, do you want to talk a little bit more about business class?
Sure. So, um, yeah, again, I think, you know, a lot of my practice and the way I generate things is just through living day to day. And, you know, we've all seen all these businesses, not so much now in COVID, but prior to that. And they all have these open signs that are of a middling graphic quality and stuff. And at a certain point, I realized, anyways, just how many varieties of basically the exact same sign there are. And I found it kind of, I find the choice and the excess interesting in that, like, you know, how many different ways can you say we're open? And um, so for this piece, I found 24 pretty readily on Amazon. Um, Actually, which again is sort of the perfect place to find things in this day and age. Um, So yeah, it's 24 open signs, and for me, what I was interested in, as I say, like how they're all basically the same. They vary a little bit in size, quality, graphic, standard, but all within a pretty narrow constraint. And for me, I start to think about a sort of a parallel to how, in many ways, that's how we all are. Not, I shouldn't say it like that, but there's a certain celebration of individuality within our culture that also exists within a narrow constraint, that I, found interesting. I don't know, I'm sure people would argue with it or not, but for me, that's where I was kind of thinking about with this piece. And then to just buy it all from the one huge online retailer seemed to make perfect sense to me. So, yeah, that's kind of the brief of the piece. It's called Business Class. And again, part of the thing I was thinking about within that idea of openness and individuality is how oftentimes that is expressed only through our being a consumer or a productive economic unit, which is, just that's where we're kind of at right now. And I'd conceived of this piece in, I think, 2017 or 2018, but hadn't realized it till now. And so it's essentially the same piece as I thought it was in 2017, but I think it took on a little bit of a different tone and maybe was a little bit enhanced, or at least, COVID affects it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In installing it, I didn't want it to be a beacon for the the keeping the economy open crowd, if you will. But
it's an interesting piece because most of, as you can kind of see in this video, most of the open signs face out onto the street, but there is one that faces into the gallery, and it's animated. So you've typed in a lot of different and programmed in a lot of different sayings.
yeah.
I have a little video, I'll just play it again, that captures them, like just a tiny segment of all of the different sayings. So what was sort of some of your thinking around having that one sign that faces in?
So, well, two things. That's the 24th sign, actually. And I knew because I was realizing this piece and I was realizing it with actually this show in mind, I knew you guys had the window at the gallery. So to have most of them facing out is obviously great from a street perspective, but then it kind of doesn't really offer much to the inside gallery viewer. So I thought it would be interesting and trying to add a further resonance to the work. I think that's sort of the challenge of my practice, and every artist practices to try to find something that resonates. So I thought it would be interesting to get this programmable sign. So it's a bit of an outlier, but it offers variations on ideas of openness. Yeah, I wish we had the full video, but that's fine. So they're all just kind of 3 or 4 word riffs on being open. So, open for good, open for open to ideas, I think is one, open to trouble. Open for attention. Yeah. So it's all kind of like riffs on ideas of openness as maybe a little bit more of an idealistic goal of a so-called open society. And it just kind of offers something to the public in the gallery. So that's sort of where I was going with that. And it's, again, just trying to extend the work and the idea. And probably that was the addition that, yeah, that came after that's like an addition since like COVID times, I guess. So the piece did change in that regard. I didn't have that open flash sign in it. Yeah, and like the mirrors, they're just kind of those self-generated texts that you're just looking for that are kind of funny, maybe a little bit engaging, offer some sort of resonance um, and things like that. Funnily enough, for that one though, when I finally had that piece up, I don't know if you were there, Emily, but the person I thought of right away was the works of Vera Gartley. I saw that influence right away. I don't know. For those of you in Edmonton, if you've been to the AGA in the last couple of years, she has a piece right in the front door called Tons of Ideas. And it's a commercial sign that delights me every time I go to the AGA. So, and she's a senior artist from Alberta and also was an instructor of mine. So it was kind of funny. I hadn't thought of her at all in that piece, but then when you kind of get it all set up, you're like, oh, there's actually something very nice. There's this reference maybe, or, thought about Vera Gartley, even if only I had it, but it kind of made me happy.
Well, that's good. Your practice should sort of have lots of ties and threads, and I think there's so many different ideas playing through a lot of your work
Yeah.
that it's kind of nice to see a little bit of influence and outcome and over the years, and not only just in the work but throughout your education and learning as well.
Yeah, and you should be, I think for me, I think of my practice, there's a little bit, I don't know, of like maybe you're a bit of a magpie and you'll like take a little piece from here and take a little piece from there and things like that, even if they're not always and then you can kind of process it a little bit after the fact as you're moving along. So yeah, anyway.
Great. And so classic last question, what's next? Do you have any other spaces that Spectator Sports is going to be in the next year, or working on any new projects?
Yeah, so Spectator Sports itself will travel down to the Nickel Gallery at the University of Calgary for what they call their series exhibition. So pretty much this show, slightly modified, I think, just because it's a different space. But yeah, that opens, I think, in early June. And then also concurrently to that, I will do a solo exhibition at Vivian Art of some new work that I'm still, percolating that will, I think, extend this idea of maybe performance and individuality a little bit, but come at it from a slightly different angle because I don't like to sit still.
I think that has served you very well in your artistic practice. So I'm a supporter of the not sitting still. But yeah, thank you all so very much for joining us today. It was a really lovely chat. And thank you so much to Kyle for creating such a fantastic exhibition and really sharing a lot of detail and extra insight into your work. It was really, really informative and very helpful. So thank you.
Oh, I'd just say thanks to you, Emily, and also Jenny, who was with the St. Albert, but moved on. Thank you both for your attention and efforts. And of course, thanks to everybody who came on to the talk tonight. It's nice to get to share a little bit. So I appreciate it.
Oh.